Next. Below is a paraphrase of an argument made at a town hall meeting seen in the documentary film The Corporation. Find and explain at least one fallacy. We're here today to debate a proposed bylaw that would ban major corporations such as Walmart or Starbucks from opening franchises in our town. There's a word for this sort of interfering in the free marketplace: socialism. Blah-blah. Was there a sound effect in the film? Probably not. Haven't we seen enough examples by now to know that socialism doesn't work? Under socialism, Russia's state-run economy resulted in a total economic collapse in the 1990s. I'll admit that China's economy may be doing okay, but their brand of socialism brings along suppression of free thought and brutal human rights abuses. Is that what you want? Sorry, I was getting into it. I have to entertain myself when I'm doing these things in some way. One, main conclusion. What is the main conclusion? What is he, this person? I remember it was a he. What is he trying to prove? Well, I think I told you this one before. My tip, or if you're having trouble figuring out what the main conclusion is in a text, ask yourself, what is the text about? And after you've answered that, ask yourself, what is it saying about that thing? Or what does the author think about that thing? We are here today to devote, sure. We're here today to deplane a proposed bylaw that would ban major corporations such as Walmart or Starbucks from opening franchises in our town. There's a word for this sort of interfering in the free marketplace: socialism. Okay, so it is about the proposed bylaw. He says that we're here to debate. So the topic of debate is the bylaw, right? We're here to debate. That means it's a topic of debate. That means that it is what this is about. And what does he think about it? Is he in favor of it? No, he is not in favor of it. So perhaps the conclusion is the proposed bylaw should not be passed. Let's see if that's right. Okay, first sentence. We're here to debate. This is setting the scene. This is exposition. There's a word for it: socialism. Okay, so this bylaw is socialism. Haven't we seen enough examples by now to know that socialism doesn't work? Socialism doesn't work. So the the bylaw is socialism. Socialism doesn't work. And the rest is examples of why socialism doesn't work. So bylaw, bad. Don't pass the bylaw. I think we've got a winner. We've got a winner, by which I mean a conclusion, but do we have a fallacy? Is it prejudicial language? I wonder if some of you are thinking prejudicial language. Is the word for this sort of interference in the free marketplace socialism? Socialism isn't a judgmental label or descriptor, although, in the US, it's thrown around like an insult. So I wouldn't blame you if you thought it was a question-begging epithet, which is another name for the fallacy of prejudicial language. I think I mentioned that. So socialism was under Russia's state-run economy resulted in a total economic collapse. China's economy may be doing okay. Their brand of socialism belongs suppression of free thought and brutal human rights abuses. Okay, well, I think it's a bit of a stretch for the prejudicial language. Most of these are descriptive words. You could say total economic collapse is like exaggeration or something, but I don't think it is. Their economy did collapse. It's just description. Likewise, socialism, like he certainly means that socialism is bad, but then he goes on to give me us reasons why socialism is bad. So not prejudicial language. What else could it be? Well, it's not hard to see the problem with the reasoning, and that is this. The bylaw that's being debated tells us what it's about right here. Would ban major corporations from opening franchises in their town. So that's what's being debated. And his reason and his problem with the bylaw, or his reason why it shouldn't be passed, is because Russia's state-run economy collapsed and China suppresses free thought and does human rights abuses. Do you see what I mean? These things don't have anything to do with one another. We're not the thing that's being proposed is should we ban major corporations from opening franchises here? This has nothing to do with what happened in Russia in the 1990s or what China is doing right now. He tries to connect them through the use of a kind of middle term, which I've already highlighted, socialism. Interfering in the free marketplace is socialism. The USSR was socialism. China has their own brand of socialism. Those things are bad, therefore the bylaw is bad, right? So that's the problem. Is there a fallacy that involves a middle term used to link to otherwise unconnected things? A fallacy of the middle term? Okay, I'm trying to make a joke out of this, but I'm failing miserably. Uh, the fallacy of the, what is it? Distributed middle. Ta-da. What is the definition of the fallacy of undistributed middle? Hang on. Okay, well, I just checked the slides and it appears that they do not contain the definition of the fallacy of the undistributed middle. I gave you some examples and I talked about it at great length in the lecture, but I did not give you a concise one sentence description like I did for all the rest. Sorry about that. One of the reasons why I have this review class is so that I can catch and plug holes like that one. So I'm going to add a definition of the fallacy of unexcluded middle to the slides and repost them. And since I am shooting this video in August, yes, 3 months before you're viewing it, that means that the version of the slides that you will see will actually be the corrected version. It's just that the definition won't be showing up on the slides in the lecture for it, which I filmed last week. So you will be able to take it from the slides, or you will be able to take it from this video right here, because I'm going to type it. Two things are connected in an argument using a third term that they have in common, but not in a way that makes the conclusion follow from the premises. That might not be identical to the one that turns up in the slides. I will be able to have another go at it, another draft, so it might be better. This differs from the definition that Mr. Spock gives in the lecture. Do you remember that Mr. Spock was in the lecture? I hope you do. And the reason why I kind of had to make up one just now is because if you look at the usual definitions online, there's kind of like two different ways a thing can happen, which is inelegant and kind of confusing. So I tried to come up with a new one that covers both of them by being less specific about the problem. Because there's two things, there's at least two things that can go wrong to have you end up with this fallacy. And I really feel like in the lecture, when I talked about it for 30 minutes, I think most people came away with the ability to recognize this. It's just that it is difficult to express without using technical, logical language. And as you know, don't want you to learn, I don't want you to have to learn technical, logical language in this course, or I'm keeping the amount that you have to learn, you know, to a minimum. Anyway, let's move on to the explanation, which will be a lot easier, trust me. Show how the argument commits the fallacy by connecting the criteria for the fallacy to the text of the argument. Okay, so I stopped the camera while I was formulating the answer, so you did not have to sit there and watch me looking at a screen and typing at a keyboard and typing things and erasing them and going back and typing more. Trust me, it was the right decision. The speaker argues against a proposed bylaw by connecting it to the evils of the Soviet Union and Communist China using the word socialism. However, just because two things, or in this case, three things, have something in common, socialism, it does not follow that they have other things in common. Just because the Soviet Union and Communist China are bad does not mean that banning large corporations from opening franchises in the town is also bad. So this connects the definition of the fallacy to the text of the argument because it shows the things that are connected. The bylaw is connected with these two communist countries via a third term that they have in common, which is socialism. So as you can see, that is showing that the argument has the structure which defines the fallacy. And then it goes on to explain why the conclusion doesn't follow, because they have one thing in common, being socialist, if they even have that in common. I mean, I feel like it's a bit of a stretch to say that any interference in the free market is socialism, because pretty much all of the countries that are capitalist, such as the United States, have some sort of regulation, some sort of government intervening in the free market. Actually, the government intervenes in the free market all the time. So, if that's socialism and therefore not capitalism, that would seem to entail that none of the countries that everybody agrees are capitalist are actually capitalist. So that is, however, a second problem. That is a misdescription of what the law is, and possibly a misdescription of what socialism is. However, you don't need to add that to show that the argument commits the fallacy of the undistributed middle. You show that by taking the definition and sort of plugging in what's going on in the argument. Undistributed middle has three terms that are connected via a middle term. Uh, and this explanation, this step four, tells us what the first term is and the middle term and the third term. It's a tiny bit confusing because the third term is actually two things, but I think you can see that sort of the Soviet Union and communist China go together in kind of a box, the communism bad box, which is definitely a different box from this bylaw, and then they're connected by this word socialism. And like I said, even if we were to grant that this proposed bylaw is socialist, which I don't think most people would do, but even if we were to grant that, it wouldn't follow that just because here's some places that were socialist and they did bad things or had bad consequences or are doing bad things, that doesn't entail that this other thing, which gets to be called socialism, is also bad. I mean, it's not like the bylaw is uh is legalizing censorship or giving the government of the town the authority to imprison people without due process, right? The distance between the bylaw and the like the failures and abuses of state communism is enormous. It's so big that it really doesn't fit on this tiny screen that I have here. It doesn't even fit on the bridge of the Enterprise. Now, although I think that the fallacy of the undistributed middle best describes the problem with the reasoning in this argument, I would have accepted other arguments as well, not arguments, answers, other answers as well, assuming that they were explained in a compelling way. So, for example, false dilemma. How is this a false dilemma? Let me explain. First, I will write the definition of false dilemma. Okay, so the definition or a definition, an acceptable definition of false dilemma is the argument presents us with two alternatives when there are more alternatives besides these two. So if we want to show that this argument commits the fallacy of false dilemma, then we need to point out what are the alternatives and demonstrate that the argument is asking us to choose between those two, and then pointing out that there is a third alternative. Can we do that? I think we can do that. I have great faith in us. The argument suggests that any interference in the free market is socialism. It is implied that we must choose between a completely unrestricted free market and I'm going to write total socialism. Total socialism being for what being a term for what the USSR and China are. So I just laid out the two alternatives that the argument says we have to choose between. So now I have to provide a third alternative. So I wrote, it is possible to have limits on the free market without doing away with it altogether, as communist nations such as China and the Soviet Union did. And perhaps just to make it as obvious as possible, there is a third alternative, which is regulated capitalism. There is a third fallacy that I would have accepted for this question, and that fallacy is straw man. Do you remember when I said a few minutes ago that I didn't think that the proposed bylaw to stop major corporations from opening franchises in the town really fit our normal definition of socialism, and that comparing it to the Soviet Union and communist China was a bit unfair? That means that he was describing it in a misleading way in order to make it seem worse than it actually was. Well, that's what the fallacy of straw man is. Straw man is when someone attributes to an opponent a position that differs from their actual position and then goes on to criticize the attributed position rather than the actual one. And as you can see, I have already written down that definition here on the screen. Now, all we need to do is to connect that definition to what the guy says in the actual text. So if we're going to show that he attributes a position to his opponent that is different from their actual position, we need to first say what the position of the opponent is. So I wrote that down. The proposed bylaw would place restrictions on what businesses can open in the town. The next step is to write down what the speaker says the opponent's position is. What does he say it is? He says it's socialism. So that's the actual position and the attributed position. So the next step is to show that he attacks or criticizes the attributed position instead of the actual position. I wrote that he goes on to recount the evils of socialism as found in the Soviet Union and communist China. So we could say a little bit more to make it really clear and obvious that socialism is a misdescription or mischaracterization of the opponent's position by saying restrictions on businesses are common in capitalist economies, like I said before. So the proposed bylaw is not socialism, and the comparison to communist countries is not appropriate. There. Number 4, Richard B. Corradi, The Federalist, 25th January 2019. Okay, that's just publication information. Below is an excerpt from an article entitled How Refusing to Direct Kids' Sexuality and Aggression Fuels Identity Politics. Find and explain at least one fallacy. Let's read it. Sadly, our society has rejected two great truths about human nature that have aided us in controlling the passions of aggression and sexuality. I already know what the fallacy is, although more precisely, I think I know. The first is that the accumulated wisdom, oh my God, I'm even more sure of the accumulated wisdom of generations of families, as well as the rich knowledge we have about human emotional and mental development, guide us in structuring families and rearing children. Similarly, several millennia of Judeo-Christian values have given us fundamental and transcendent truths about morality. Family and religion have been the civilizing influences that have shaped Western culture. Now, it's possible that the particular answer that I have in mind, the particular fallacy, is jumping out at me because earlier today I was editing the video lecture in which I was talking about this fallacy, so it's fresh in my mind, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's obvious to most of you as well. And that fallacy is the fallacy of appeal to tradition, which is one of the subcategories of appeal to authority. So appeal to tradition is like basically old equals good. It's something's been around for a long time, therefore it must be good. Look, our society has rejected two great truths about human nature that have aided us in controlling the passions of aggression and sexuality. The accumulated wisdom of generations of families. Accumulated wisdom of generations of families. So the stuff that we have believed and done for a long time is good because we've believed and done it for a long time. Several millennia of Judeo-Christian values have given us several millennia of Judeo-Christian values given us fundamental and transcendent truth about morality. How do we know that they're truths and not just things that people believe? Because they've been around for several millennia. If they've been around for this long, then they must be correct, right? Finally, family and religion have been the civilizing influences that have shaped Western culture. Family and religion. Okay, you remember that I did a whole bit on how saying that something is true or good because it comes from a religion is a version of a appeal to tradition, because a religion is just a kind of tradition that people are very emotionally invested in. It's just things that people believe, and there's no evidence for it. So this is another case where we were able to guess the fallacy before going through the criticizing the fallacy steps, but I'm still going to go through them with you, because it's an example and I want to demonstrate how to do it. What is he trying to prove? I wonder if the conclusion is not in the text, which is an excerpt from a larger text, but in the title, which we're given up here. Look, refusing to direct kids' sexuality and aggression fuels identity politics. Do you remember in the directions I said sometimes the conclusion will not be in the excerpt, but it will be elsewhere in the text of the larger thing that it's taken from? Like plenty of titles of articles simply state the thing that they're arguing for. How refusing to direct kids' sexuality and aggression fuels identity politics. That in its current form, that can't be the conclusion because it's not a statement, it's not a claim. The conclusion is claiming something. This is saying, I'm going to tell you how this happens. But how about if we take off the how and go, refusing to direct kids' sexuality and aggression fuels identity politics. Then it's a statement, then it's a claim that could be a conclusion. And it is probably what the author is setting out to prove or support in the article. But I don't want to lead you astray here. Just because that's what he's setting out to prove in the whole article doesn't necessarily mean that what he's trying to prove in this little excerpt is that same thing. Because arguments are frequently composed of subordinate arguments, right? First you prove this thing, then you prove this thing, and so on. The steps that you have to go through to get to your main conclusion. That's why I say main conclusion. And so while it's certainly possible for in a question like this, where I've given you the title of the the article, the whole text, it's certainly possible that the conclusion of the passage could be found in the title. That's not always going to be the case. I mean, okay, kid sexuality and aggression, identity politics. That's there's like three terms that the first, not that the first, three terms that the title is about. Are these mentioned in the passage? Let's read it again. Our society, sadly, our society has rejected two great truths about human nature that have aided us in controlling the passions of aggression and sexuality. Well, hang on. Look, we just found aggression and sexuality. I'm going to highlight those in purple as well. The first is that the accumulated wisdom of generations of families, that doesn't say anything about aggression, sexuality, or identity politics, as well as the rich knowledge we have about human emotional and mental development, guide us in structuring families and rearing children. I mean, rearing children, maybe, because I guess rearing children could involve directing or refusing to direct kids' sexuality and aggression. So that has to do with the same thing. Several millennia of Judeo-Christian values, nope. Giving us fundamental and transcendent truth about morality. I might return to that point, but it's not about sexuality, aggression, or identity politics. Family and religion have been the civilizing influences that have shaped Western culture. Okay, so there's nothing in this passage about identity politics. Identity politics not even mentioned in this passage. So this passage would not allow us to infer the conclusion refusing to direct kids' sexuality and aggression fuels identity politics. So that can't be the main conclusion for this passage. Sadly, our society has rejected two great truths about human nature. The first is that the accumulated wisdom of generations of families, as well as the rich knowledge you have about human emotional and mental development, this is hard to follow because it's so wordy, guide us in instructing families and rearing children. So the first truth is something about wisdom that comes from the past. Similarly, so I guess this is the second one, several millennia of Judeo-Christian values have given us fundamental and transcendent truth about morality. Family and religion have been the civilizing influences that have shaped Western culture. So is he saying the two great truths are family and religion? Okay. I think the conclusion is that this passage is very poorly. It is failing really hard at making any sort of coherent point. Okay. Family and religion have been the civilizing influences that have shaped Western culture. I would have accepted that as the conclusion. Not really because it's at the end, but because it sort of summarizes the rest of it. However, that's not what I'm going to write down because I can think of something better. We should raise our children in accordance with religion and traditional family values. So when the author says in the final line, family and religion have been the civilizing influences that have shaped Western culture. That is supposed to be a descriptive statement, not a normative statement. It's saying this is how things are. This is how things have been. But although it is framed as a descriptive statement, I would argue that it is better understood to be a normative claim disguised as a descriptive claim. Family and religion have been the civilizing influences that have shaped Western culture. Civilizing influences. Well, that sounds good. Civilizing is good, right? So it's kind of saying that family and religion, or like obviously the specific forms of family and religion that Mr. Richard B. Karate is talking about, are good. We know they're good because they've civilized us. And the language throughout the passage also is trying to convince us that these things are good. Look, sadly, our society has rejected two great truths about human nature. So they're true, apparently, because he's calling them truths. Also, he's saying that it is sad, i.e., bad, that we have rejected them. It's sad that we've rejected them because they're good and true, that have aided us, okay? Aided us, helped us, made us better in controlling the passions of aggression and sexuality. The first, the accumulated wisdom of generations of families. Notice how he says the accumulated wisdom. I'm going to re-highlight that. I wonder if it'll put in both colors. So the way he says it, the words that he uses are normative words. That is, words that connote how things should be rather than just how they are. What he's referring to, stated objectively, would be the beliefs and practices that we group together with the term family values. But he doesn't call them beliefs and practices. He calls them wisdom. Okay. So wisdom means that they're wise, that they're smart, that they're true and correct. So you see how selection of words is saying that these are good and correct without ever coming out and saying these things are good and correct. The rich knowledge we have about human emotional and mental development, rich knowledge, okay? Similarly, rich knowledge simply refers to like a set of beliefs. Here's some beliefs. The beliefs that I believes, they're not just beliefs, they're rich knowledge. Knowledge means that they're correct. Rich knowledge means that they're, you know, expensive knowledge, very good knowledge. No, something more like full and intricate and nuanced. Guide us in structuring families and rearing children. Several millennia Judeo-Christian values have given us. Here we go. Wanted to come back to this. Fundamental and transcendent truth. So I have footnoted those words. Let's look at the footnotes in case they help. So fundamental means forming a necessary core or basis of central importance. Okay, so fundamental things are very important things, and they're the basis of other things. Transcendent means beyond ordinary human understanding. So if they're beyond human understanding, how do we know that they're true? Yeah? Like we don't understand them. How do we know that we've gotten them correct? This makes no sense. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Fundamental and transcendent truth is more language implying that these things are good and true. I think that I have just accidentally demonstrated that this passage really, really commits the fallacy of prejudicial language because I just highlighted a whole bunch of prejudicial language, judgmental descriptors that support a particular position without evidence. The other instances of prejudicial language that we saw were derogatory. Here, they're the opposite. They're words that make something seem good. And do they bias us in favor of a particular position without evidence? I think so, because I think they're serving in the place of an argument. Look, we should raise our children in accordance with religion and traditional family values. Why? Because family and religion have been the civilizing influences that have shaped Western culture. Judeo-Christian values have given us fundamental and transcendent truth about morality. Accumulated wisdom of generations of families. Rich knowledge guide us. Sadly, our society has rejected two great truths that have aided us in controlling the passions of aggression and sexuality. So earlier, I said that I would have accepted family and religion have been the civilizing influences that have shaped Western culture as the main conclusion, because it is a kind of summary. Like it's not saying anything that isn't in the preceding sentences. It's saying the same thing as them, only more concisely. That's what a summary is. So there's no argument here. It pretends that there's an argument, but it's just, oh, it's so sad that we have rejected family and religion. Uh, Generations of families have accumulated wisdom about human emotional and mental development that guide us in structuring families and rearing children. Judeo-Christian values are really good. And then family and religion have civilized us. Do you see, instead of giving us reason to think that religion and traditional family values are good things, or that we should allow them to guide us, he just keeps speaking of them as if they are good. He just keeps labeling them as good. This is such a great example of prejudicial language that I think in the future I might use it in a lecture as an illustration. What's particularly funny is that I remember, or I think I remember, that when I picked this as a question for, some test in the past, because all of these questions come from previous fallacy tests and from previous times that I've taught the course, I was thinking appeal to tradition. And it is appealing to tradition because it's saying traditional family values and religion are good without giving us any reason to think that they're good. It's just, it is, you know, it very much fits the old equals good pattern of appeal to authority, uh, of the appeal to tradition version of appeal to authority. And it is the language that it uses is quite emotional, which goes along with that because basically think that we only listen to traditions because we're emotionally invested in them. So it's funny that I was looking for the answer appeal to tradition and then convinced myself that the fallacy of prejudicial language was at least as good an answer for this. I'm pretty sure that for those of you who did write the practice test, either at home or in tutorial, came up with one of those two answers. There's a third fallacy that I would have accepted, which is begging the question. So, begging the question is when the conclusion just repeats what the premises say in different wording. So it's sort of like it's true because it's true. I've already pointed out that what this passage does is basically make the same point over and over, just in a very painfully wordy way, so that you think that there's something else going on, or maybe you get a bit confused because the sentences are so long, and therefore you just give it a pass. Oh, for number two, prejudicial language and appeal to tradition and begging the question. Well, we've already spent almost 2 hours going through this 45-minute test, so I don't think I am going to finish going through question number four. Actually, how about this? I will do step four for begging the question because some of you might like to see an example of how to do that. And if I'm going to do step four, I kind of need to do step three as well, because step four is connecting the criteria for the fallacy to the text of the argument, and the criteria for the fallacy are stated in step three. So let's do that now. Begging the question is when the conclusion repeats the premises in other words. I'm pretending to type because, well, let me explain. I already shot this part, but the footage is unusable for reasons beyond my control. And by reasons beyond my control, I mean I forgot to press record. So I actually already did them and I already typed them out. So, but I do want to go through them, the steps one by one, instead of just going, here, look what I did, read. Because I promised that I would be, demonstrating the process of coming up with the answers and not just giving you the answers. So everything that I'm going to say is already on the screen. If you're going to go with the fallacy of begging the question, the other conclusion that I said I would accept for this passage, family and religion have been the civilizing influences that have shaped Western culture, fits better if we're going to say the fallacy of begging the question. So I also changed that. So in step four, we have to show that the conclusion just restates the premises in other words. So we start off by saying what conclusion is. Family and religion have been the civilizing influences that have shaped Western culture. Now I am going to summarize the rest of the passage in a way that shows that the other claims are not saying anything different from what the conclusion is saying. I wrote, the first sentence alludes to two great truths that have aided us. The second sentence tells us that the first one is family, and the third sentence tells us that the second one is religion. Family and religion are the two great truths that have aided us. This is the same as saying that family and religion have been the civilizing influences on Western culture, which is the conclusion of the argument. There. Do you see what I did? Do you think you can do something similar? Good. Now, I hope that the fact that it took us almost 2 hours to go through the practice test is not going to mislead you into thinking that it will take you anywhere near that long to write the actual fallacy test. Probably not, because most of you have already written the practice test in your tutorial or perhaps at home. Furthermore, I was explaining what I was doing as I went, and as you know, it always takes longer to explain something than to do it. I'm sorry that was so long and rambly, but like I said at the beginning, I did this without a script and without any prior preparation. So I was having to come up with everything that I was saying in real time. Thank you for your patience, and I will see you after the Christmas break.